Father Giovanni Leone, Archbishop Elias Harun, Rabbi Moshe Elbaz, and Sheikh Khalid Mahfouz. These four men had one thing in common. They were the heart of a secret peace initiative that could have transformed the Middle East. But when Pope Francis died suddenly, the world was left to wonder. Did their deaths and the unraveling of the Pope's final mission reveal a hidden conspiracy that powerful forces were desperate to silence? Their stories, and the fate of the shepherds, pact, hold the key to a global secret that could change everything.
The news broke at 6:42 a.m. Rome time. Pope Francis had died in his private chambers during the early hours of the morning. The announcement came from the Vatican press office in a short, restrained statement, citing natural causes. There was no warning, no indication of illness, no prior hospitalization. Just silence. And then, chaos. Within minutes, the world reacted. Crowds flooded St. Peter's Square, candles lit and prayers whispered. But beyond the grief, something felt off. Too sudden, too quiet, too controlled. As tributes poured in from every corner of the globe, a darker undercurrent took hold. International media outlets began reporting that the Pope had been in the middle of a classified spiritual summit. No cameras, no records, and no public acknowledgement of its participants. Only vague mentions of sensitive discussions about interfaith reconciliation in the Middle East. The summit had ended just 24 hours before his death. Now, speculation surged. In Gaza, a noticeable unease settled over the region. A scheduled address from a Hamas spokesperson was postponed indefinitely. Rumors circulated through underground channels and encrypted apps. Whispers claimed that Francis had been working on something unprecedented, an agreement involving religious leaders and militant factions alike, a plan for peace, not just in words, but in signed commitments. Yet no official documents were ever found, no recordings, only whispers. In Jerusalem, a senior bishop abruptly canceled a planned press conference, citing unforeseen pressure. In Beirut, a respected imam vanished after publicly praising the Pope's efforts just days earlier. Across the region, silence replaced statements. It was as though a curtain had been drawn, hiding something larger than any one man's death. In the Vatican, security was quietly increased. Sources close to the Curia described a lockdown of information. Cardinals reportedly had their devices confiscated. Internal servers were scrubbed. The Pope's personal chambers were sealed by the Swiss Guard, and the contents removed, without explanation. As the world mourned, others began digging. Investigators, journalists, intelligence agencies, they all sensed it. This was not the peaceful passing of a beloved religious leader. It was the first tremor of something much deeper and much more dangerous. 3 days after the sudden death of Pope Francis, a document surfaced that changed everything. It wasn't released through official channels, nor was it mentioned during any of the Vatican's briefings. Instead, it appeared on a secure message board used by whistleblowers and underground journalists. The file was a scanned letter, handwritten, dated the night before his death, and addressed to the faithful of the Holy Land. It carried the Pope's personal seal. The message was unlike anything the public had ever seen from the pontiff. It spoke not only of prayer and perseverance, but of shadows and deception. He warned that those who claim to protect the sacred are trading in secrets and power. He mentioned direct talks with leaders across the region, talks that had taken place in silence, away from politics, borders, and headlines. The letter implied that militant groups, including factions from Hamas, had been part of these dialogues. There were phrases like, "a fragile bridge built from old enemies," and "a pact not signed with ink, but with sacrifice." International media erupted. Was this the Pope's final effort to broker real peace? If so, why had it been hidden? Why had the Vatican not released the letter themselves? More unsettling was the letter's closing lines, which read like a riddle. "The shepherd lays down his life not only for his sheep, but to reveal the wolves among them. Beware those who preach unity, yet fund division." The Vatican refused to confirm or deny the authenticity of the letter. Their silence only added to the storm. Online, people began dissecting every word. Some claimed it was a forgery. Others said it was the reason for his death. Religious communities across the Middle East were left stunned. Some Christian leaders in Lebanon, Syria, and Palestine admitted they had received similar messages, personal, cryptic, and urgent, warning them to tread carefully in the days ahead. As trust in official narratives began to crumble, one question echoed everywhere. If Pope Francis was trying to unite the most divided corners of the world, who had the most to lose from that peace? And would they kill to keep it buried? Hours after the leaked letter went viral, the world's attention shifted to Gaza. A Hamas-affiliated news channel announced it would be holding a live broadcast in response to the Pope's final message. No additional details were given, only a brief teaser. The truth will be addressed. Prepare. Millions tuned in. Social media platforms flooded with countdowns and speculation. The anticipation was electric, but so was the fear. When the feed began, the screen showed a dimly lit room with a plain flag draped behind a podium. A senior Hamas spokesperson stepped forward, his face tense, voice uncharacteristically subdued. What followed was not the fiery rhetoric the world expected, but something far more unsettling. He didn't deny the Pope's claims. In fact, he didn't even attempt to discredit the letter. Instead, he spoke in vague, guarded terms about certain understandings that were never meant for daylight and a process interrupted by unnatural hands. Then, less than 6 minutes into the broadcast, the screen flickered. Background sounds, muffled voices, a scuffle, metal scraping, cut through the audio. The spokesperson turned slightly, clearly distracted. The feed froze, then cut out entirely. No explanation followed. The channel went dark. Panic erupted online. Was it sabotage? An internal dispute? Or something more calculated? Within hours, unofficial footage leaked. Cell phone recordings showing armed men entering the building where the broadcast was filmed. The identity of the intruders remained unknown. Hamas issued no further statements. When reporters attempted to reach the channel's staff, most were unreachable or reportedly relocated. The silence only deepened the mystery. Analysts from global intelligence agencies began to weigh in, suggesting that the interruption had not come from outside, but from within. The most chilling theory was that factions inside Hamas were split, some working toward peace alongside the Pope's vision, others violently opposed. The live reaction was no longer just a reaction. It had become evidence that the Pope's final message hadn't been a fantasy or a fabrication, but a real threat to certain powers. Someone had wanted the message silenced, and they'd made sure the world saw just enough to feel the danger, but not enough to understand it. As the world reeled from the interrupted Hamas broadcast, an unexpected figure emerged from the shadows of the Vatican. Luca Bravetti, a 29-year-old cybersecurity technician, released a detailed statement through an encrypted network used by journalists and dissidents. Bravetti claimed to have worked in the Vatican's internal communications division for over 5 years, with high-level clearance to monitor and secure the Pope's private correspondence. What he revealed sent shockwaves across intelligence communities and media outlets alike. According to Bravetti, Pope Francis had been under digital surveillance, not from hostile governments or foreign hackers, but from within the Vatican itself. He claimed that certain emails and messages from the Pope's account were intercepted and modified before being delivered. These alterations, he said, were subtle, slight changes in wording, omissions of key names, and redirection of sensitive attachments. The goal, he insisted, was not just censorship but manipulation. Bravetti provided screenshots and server logs showing irregular access patterns into the Pope's private mail server. One file in particular stood out, a draft version of the now leaked letter. This earlier draft contained a list of specific individuals and factions involved in the secret talks, including high-ranking figures from Hamas, Hezbollah, and even a few prominent Israeli rabbis. That version never left the server. Bravetti claimed it had been deleted and replaced by the more cryptic version that eventually leaked, sanitized, but still dangerous. He also alleged that shortly before the Pope's death, his devices were remotely accessed without proper clearance. Digital traces pointed to an internal login used only by members of the Apostolic Palace's Security Council, an elite group trusted with overseeing the Vatican's physical and digital integrity. Bravetti disappeared shortly after releasing his testimony. His apartment in Rome was found empty, his phone abandoned on the kitchen counter. No missing person report was filed. Vatican officials refused to comment on his claims, dismissing them as baseless and unauthorized. But those following the story saw it differently. To them, Bravetti wasn't just a whistleblower. He was a key piece in a puzzle of deception, pointing toward a quiet power struggle within the Vatican. A struggle in which the Pope may have been the first and most public casualty. Just when speculation around the Pope's death and the altered letter was beginning to fade into a cloud of unanswered questions, a new development reignited global attention. An encrypted audio file, uploaded anonymously to a secure server hosted in Iceland, was discovered by a group of digital archivists. It was labeled simply Shepherd Final 1.mp3. The voice on the recording was unmistakably that of Pope Francis. In the recording, his tone was weary but resolute. He spoke slowly, as if knowing the message might be his last. He began by expressing love for all, reaffirming his commitment to peace in the Middle East. But then, the message darkened. He warned of a growing faction, one that existed both within religious institutions and political structures, that sought to maintain division for personal gain. Peace does not profit them, he said. Fear keeps them funded, keeps them powerful. The Pope explained that the peace talks he had helped initiate were more successful than anyone had predicted. Leaders from opposing sides had met in secret, away from cameras and headlines, and had agreed in principle to what he called the Pact of the Three Keys, a symbolic name representing Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. According to him, this pact was not yet written on paper, but it lived in the hearts of the men and women involved. Most chillingly, the Pope spoke of a dossier. He mentioned it had been compiled with names, locations, and agreements tied to these covert peace efforts. It was hidden beneath the Vatican in the ancient catacombs, a place few ever accessed. If I do not live to bring it forward, he said, let it find the light another way. The file ended with a long silence, followed by a faint knock in the background, and then the recording abruptly cut off. The Vatican made no official response, and efforts to authenticate the recording were quietly blocked by internal channels. Still, the world heard it. And for many it was no longer a question of whether the Pope had been silenced. It was only a matter of who had the most to lose by letting him speak. A week after the release of the Pope's audio recording, an unusual breach shook the heart of the Vatican. Just after midnight, 2 intruders were spotted on surveillance cameras entering the ancient catacombs beneath St. Peter's Basilica. These underground passages, closed to the public and guarded around the clock, held centuries of secrets. The Rawi intruders moved with purpose, avoiding detection for nearly 20 minutes before disappearing from the feed entirely. When Vatican security arrived, they found nothing missing, at least nothing obvious. But deeper in the tunnels, something was gone. Hidden behind a sealed stone panel was a concealed chamber used for secure storage of sensitive relics and documents. Inside, an iron-bound chest had been pried open. Its contents were missing. No one outside the Vatican knew what had been kept there, until anonymous insiders leaked that the chest had contained the dossier Pope Francis spoke about in his final message. A torn scrap of parchment was found nearby. On it were coordinates, hand-drawn and marked in red ink, pointing to a remote area in Egypt's Sinai Desert. The Vatican made no public mention of the incident, but news of the theft spread fast among global intelligence agencies. If the Pope's hidden dossier had indeed been stolen, it could contain the names of every figure involved in the secret peace process: religious leaders, political intermediaries, and possibly even armed militants. Immediately, surveillance, satellites were redirected over the Sinai. What they found was unexpected. The area near the coordinates was active. Structures, long thought abandoned, showed signs of recent use. Vehicle tracks, heat signatures, communications. Some speculated that the location served as a neutral zone, a hidden negotiation ground far from the eyes of the world. Others suggested something more sinister, that the site had been taken over by those opposed to peace, determined to erase all traces of the Pope's efforts. Meanwhile, no suspects were identified in the Vatican breach. The intruders vanished, without a trace, leaving behind only silence, an empty chest, and a question no one dared to answer. Who else had known where to look? He coordinates scrawled on the torn parchment led investigators deep into the Sinai Peninsula, a region where time seemed frozen and surveillance was sparse. Tucked between jagged cliffs and wind-scoured dunes was an old compound, once used during the Cold War and long since abandoned, or so everyone thought. Satellite images revealed recent modifications, solar panels, satellite dishes, and a landing pad carved into the rocky plateau. Someone had brought the site back to life. Intelligence. Analysts from multiple countries began monitoring the area in shifts. Thermal imaging picked up movement underground. Trucks came and went under cover of night. More intriguing were the faint encrypted radio transmissions intercepted nearby. They mentioned something called the Shepherd's Pact, a name that hadn't appeared in any known political or religious framework until now. Researchers traced the term back to a classified UN archive in Geneva. Buried in the records of failed peace summits from 2 decades ago, the Shepherd's Pact appeared as a code name for a proposed interfaith agreement. The idea had been to create a permanent council of Christian, Muslim, and Jewish leaders, with legal authority to intervene in regional conflicts. It was meant to act as a spiritual alternative to military solutions. But the proposal was rejected, quietly and forcefully, after heavy lobbying from global defense contractors and religious hardliners. Now it seemed Pope Francis had been reviving that idea, using his influence to gather support in secret. The Sinai compound, with its secrecy and neutrality, had likely been one of the few places safe enough for such meetings to occur. But the compound wasn't just a relic of the past. New reports suggested the presence of multiple factions, some working together, others watching each other closely. An uneasy alliance, held together by fear and silence. As the world watched from afar, it became clear that the Pope's vision had come closer to reality than anyone had dared to believe. And now that vision, stolen and exposed, was at the mercy of those who might exploit it or destroy it entirely. The desert had kept its secrets well, but not even the sands of Sinai could bury them forever. The deeper investigators dug into the history of the Shepherd's Pact, the clearer its significance became. Originally conceived during a confidential summit in Geneva in 2003, the pact had been a radical idea, even by peacemaking standards. It proposed the formation of a spiritual council made up of senior religious figures from Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. But this was no symbolic group. It would have legal recognition, diplomatic immunity, and influence over border disputes, arms deals, and regional security policies. In effect, it was an attempt to give moral authority actual power. And for some, that was unacceptable. The pact never saw daylight. It was buried under red tape and political resistance, officially labeled too idealistic and impractical. Unofficially, leaked memos revealed something else. Aggressive lobbying from military suppliers, oil conglomerates, and national governments who stood to lose influence if war gave way to faith-led cooperation. The pact's architects were discredited or reassigned. It vanished from public discourse until Pope Francis decided to resurrect it. Behind the scenes, he had begun rebuilding the network needed to give the pact another chance. He met quietly with key figures, Muslim scholars in Turkey, Jewish leaders in Jerusalem, and Christian bishops across North Africa. No press releases, no cameras, just conversations, promises, plans. According to documents leaked by insiders, the Pope had made surprising progress. Many of the original supporters of the pact were still alive, still committed, and more frustrated than ever by decades of failed diplomacy. But he hadn't moved alone. A shadow group within the Vatican, known informally as the Custodians, had reportedly been monitoring his efforts. Their goal wasn't to oppose peace, but to control it. They believed such a powerful religious coalition could only exist if it served Vatican interests first. The Pope disagreed, and that disagreement, some believed, had cost him his life. Now, with the dossier missing and the Sinai compound exposed, the world knew the pact had not only existed, it had nearly been revived. But peace built in shadows doesn't stay stable for long. And as the truth emerged, so did the fractures between those who wanted change and those willing to do anything to stop it. In the weeks that followed the exposure of the Sinai compound and the rediscovery of the Shepherd's Pact, a chilling pattern began to emerge. 3 prominent religious leaders, all known allies of Pope Francis, died within days of one another. Their deaths, though officially unrelated, raised immediate suspicion among those tracking the unraveling conspiracy. The first was Archbishop Elias Harun from Lebanon, found dead in his study after reportedly suffering a heart attack. He had been one of the Pope's closest Middle Eastern advisors and had quietly championed interfaith dialogue for decades. 2 days later, Rabbi Moshe Elbaz, a progressive spiritual leader from Jerusalem who had met privately with the Pope the previous year, died in a single car crash on a quiet road just outside the city. Authorities called it an accident, but surveillance footage from nearby traffic cameras was mysteriously unavailable. Then came the death of Sheikh Khalid Mahfouz, a reformist imam from Cairo who had spoken glowingly of the Pope's vision only weeks earlier. He collapsed during Friday prayers. No autopsy was performed. To the public, they were unfortunate tragedies. To those watching closely, they were eliminations, carefully timed and clean. Digital records leaked to independent journalists showed that all 3 had been in contact days before the Pope's death. Encrypted messages revealed a coordinated plan to meet in person at a neutral site. That meeting never happened. Fear gripped what remained of the secret movement behind the Shepherd's Pact. Communication slowed, alliances fractured. No one could be sure who to trust. Some speculated that internal sabotage had doomed the pact from within. Others believed a larger, more powerful force had intervened to crush the effort before it reached critical mass. What had started as a global initiative to build peace through shared faith had now turned into a silent war of erasure. With the Pope gone, his supporters dying, and his vision scattered to the winds, the movement seemed doomed to fade back into myth. But there were still whispers, digital footprints left behind, hidden caches of information, and scattered believers who refused to give up the dream. The movement had been silenced, but it was not entirely dead. Not yet. Months passed after the deaths of the 3 religious leaders, and the world appeared to move on from the chaos sparked by Pope Francis's sudden death and his cryptic final message. The Vatican had buried its involvement, and the media shifted focus to other global crises. Yet, in the shadows, the embers of a deeper conspiracy continued to smolder. As the Vatican's silence deepened, a handful of digital activists, former intelligence agents, and rogue journalists quietly worked to piece together the remnants of the Shepherd's Pact. They began sharing information through encrypted channels, piecing together clues that hinted at a larger, more dangerous reality. It became clear that Pope Francis's efforts had not only been an attempt at religious reconciliation, but a serious challenge to the established powers that governed the Middle East and beyond. The peace he sought would have undermined decades of political maneuvering, arms deals, and covert interventions, efforts that kept certain nations, religious groups, and financial interests in control. By now, most of the key players involved in the peace talks had gone underground. Many had either disappeared entirely or were too frightened to speak out. But one name kept resurfacing: Father Giovanni Leone, an excommunicated priest who had once been one of the Pope's most trusted advisors. Leone had reportedly gone rogue after the Pope's death, collecting documents and recordings tied to the peace talks. His hideout was said to be in a remote village in Italy, and he had become an unofficial guardian of the information the Vatican sought to erase. In the months following the Pope's death, Father Leone had become an elusive figure, his whereabouts unknown to all but a few. But in early spring, a mysterious video surfaced on dark web platforms. The shaky footage showed Father Leone sitting in a dimly lit room, speaking directly to the camera. His message was brief, but it confirmed everything the conspiracies had feared. The truth is not lost. It only waits to be found. Despite the ongoing risks, small groups began searching for the hidden documents, determined to find the truth about the Shepherd's Pact. The Vatican had silenced one man, but the truth had a way of slipping through cracks, often in the most unexpected places. Whether or not the full story would ever be uncovered remained uncertain, but the whispers persisted. The Pope's death had set off a chain of events that no one, not even the most powerful forces in the world, could completely control.